So, you hate phone calls, suffer from sensory overload, and would rather get a root canal than go to a social function. Must be autism, right? Maybe, or maybe not. This is going to be a bit of a controversial topic, but I think one that's very much needed. If you've clicked on this video, it's likely because you or someone you know suspects they may be on the autism spectrum. And as a clinical psychologist who does both therapy and psychological assessments, I see this all the time. In fact, I've had a significant number of clients come in for psych testing thinking that they might be autistic, but in the vast majority of cases, the testing indicates otherwise. So what's happening here? It's not that these folks aren't struggling, they are, and it's not that their concerns aren't real or valid, they are, but when we're talking about autism, we're talking about a very specific neurodevelopmental condition, and the online conversation around it has often become too broad, too vague, and sometimes unintentionally misleading. First off, if you even suspect you might be autistic, you're probably struggling with things like social connection, a sense of identity, or emotional exhaustion in social spaces. And I just want to acknowledge that that can be really hard. Being unsure of who you are or why you feel different can be incredibly painful, especially in a society that emphasizes connection and self-definition. Secondly, before some of you may want to fire off some comments below about how wrong I might be on this issue, I think we have to bear in mind that there is a well-known saying that travels in autism circles, which is attributed to Dr. Stephen Shore, that states, if you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism. This speaks to the incredibly idiosyncratic nature of this disorder. So there is no way that the content of this or any other video is going to accurately capture the experience or definition of autism in everyone who may have it. And that's part of what can make diagnosis so complicated in the cases that are a bit more in the gray area. Here's where things get tricky. A lot of the traits described online as autistic, things like social awkwardness, needing routine, or feeling overwhelmed by noise, can show up in a whole range of other experiences. Trauma, ADHD, social anxiety, introversion, even depression. All of these can overlap with autism in surface-level ways. To illustrate this, consider an analogy. Imagine someone describes a creature. It walks on two legs, has body hair, communicates with gestures, follows a social structure, uses tools, solves problems. Is this a human, or is it a chimpanzee? The answer is it could be either, because those traits, while accurate, are too general to distinguish one from the other. And that's exactly the problem with many online autism checklists. They list traits that are real, but not diagnostic. To help make this point even more clear, consider the following list of symptoms. Difficulty reading social cues, discomfort in unstructured social situations, tendency to rehearse conversations in advance, feeling mentally overloaded or shut down in busy environments, avoidance of eye contact, strong need for routines and predictability, intense focus on specific interests, being sensitive to noise, lights, or fabrics, trouble shifting attention or switching tasks, overthinking social interactions after they happen, feeling different from others, even since childhood, difficulty making or keeping close friendships, trouble managing emotions like anger, shame, or anxiety, history of feeling misunderstood or rejected by peers, struggles with motivation or organizing daily tasks, periods of dissociation or zoning out under stress. All of the above symptoms may occur to some degree in autism, but here's the catch. I drew those symptoms from an amalgamation of symptoms that are common in ADHD, social anxiety, PTSD, and sensory processing disorder. And I think this is one of the big issues driving the online-based self-diagnosing I'm seeing a lot of these days, especially when it occurs in the context of confirmation bias, which is a universal human trait that almost all of us are susceptible to. This brings us to one of the most overlooked aspects of autism diagnosis: levels of support. A true diagnosis of autism doesn't just list traits. It includes a rating of how much external support a person needs in his daily life. In the DSM, the manual that describes diagnostic criteria for psychological and developmental disorders, the criteria for autism for levels of support are level 1, requiring support, level 2, requiring substantial support, and level 3, requiring very substantial support. Even at the least severe level, level 1, those with autism tend to fail to establish friendships unless they receive specific help or guidance, and their restrictive and repetitive behaviors and difficulty with change or breaking routine cause significant impairments in basic functioning. So, if you're working full-time, managing relationships, and generally functioning independently, even if you struggle with anxiety or social discomfort, you might not meet the criteria for autism. Because autism, by definition, involves substantial difficulties in adaptive functioning, or doing the basic day-to-day things like going shopping, planning the week ahead, estimating time schedules, dealing with an unanticipated change, managing finances and paying bills. It's not just how you feel, it's how you function. Now, let's talk a little bit about the phrase high-functioning autism. What does that actually mean? Historically, it simply meant someone with autism who does not also have an intellectual disability. That's it. It doesn't mean they don't struggle. It doesn't mean that they don't need support. But somewhere along the way, high functioning became misinterpreted as mild or quirky but genius, which paints an inaccurate picture. Another phrase I often hear is, "I'm just really good at masking my symptoms." And yes, masking is a real phenomenon, especially in autistic women, where someone mimics social behaviors to blend in. But here's the thing. True autism involves a fundamental difference in processing social emotional cues, especially nonverbal ones. This makes deep, consistent masking very difficult to maintain, and often exhausting. Think of trying to fake a genuine, joyful smile when you're actually feeling sad. That disconnect is hard to maintain convincingly, especially over time. A helpful comparison might be the late Robin Williams. He was brilliant, warm, socially skilled, but also deeply depressed. He masked his depression so well that the world was shocked by him when he took his own life. But here's the key. He was masking emotion, not a lack of social understanding. Therapy and vulnerability might have helped him unmask and heal. For someone with autism, however, the masking is different. It's not about hiding pain, but about trying to manually replicate behaviors that neurotypicals learn intuitively. That's a much more cognitively demanding process, and it often doesn't go away with therapy because it's not rooted in emotional avoidance, but neurological wiring. So let's bring this into life with a real life example. Picture a group of 10 coworkers on a break. Someone tells a joke, and most of the group laughs. The neurotypical person laughs naturally, maybe adds a comment, and enjoys the moment. The person with social anxiety laughs too, but internally panics. Was I too loud? Did I seem weird? The person with major depression might understand the joke, but feel too numb to react. The person with PTSD might be startled or withdrawn, unsure whether the group is safe. And the autistic person, they might not get the joke right away, or they may laugh offbeat, not because they're anxious, but because their brain processes social timing differently. Same situation, 5 different internal realities. Now imagine that same group gets an invite to a casual Friday hangout. The neurotypical person says, "Sure, sounds fun." The person with social anxiety says, like, "Oh no, what if I embarrass myself?" The person with depression thinks, "What's the point?" The person with PTSD worries, "Will this be a safe space?" And the autistic person, they might think, "What exactly does casual hangout mean? How long will it be? What's expected of me? The hesitation is real, but the reasons are different. Now, back to that overlap between autism and ADHD. This one's important. Executive functioning, our ability to plan, focus, regulate emotions, and manage time, is a prefrontal cortical function. One of the things that separates us from other animals. When it's impaired, as in ADHD, social life gets harder too. Not because the person doesn't understand social rules, but because they can't reliably apply them. They may interrupt, lose track of a conversation, come across as scattered, but that's different from the social confusion of autism. Another feature that often leads people to wonder if they're autistic is sensory sensitivity. Being overwhelmed by loud noises, irritated by clothing textures, sensitive to lighting, or unable to tolerate strong smells or flavors. While it's true that sensory differences are common in autism, they are not exclusive to autism and by themselves are not diagnostic. You'll see sensory sensitivity in people with anxiety, PTSD, OCD, migraine disorders, or even in individuals with no mental health diagnosis at all, simply highly sensitive nervous systems. Here's why. Our brains filter and respond to sensory input differently depending on what's going on beneath the surface. In anxiety and trauma-related conditions, parts of the brain like the amygdala, which detects threat, and the thalamus, which processes sensory signals, become hyperactive. It's not that the senses themselves are broken, it's that the brain is on high alert, filtering everything through a lens of potential danger. This can make sensory experiences feel more intense, more unpredictable, and more overwhelming. We see this in PTSD, where someone might flinch at a loud sound or bright lights, not because of autism, but because their brain has learned to treat those stimuli as potential threats. Compare this to autism, where the brain's wiring for sensory integration may be fundamentally different. A child with autism might become distressed by a noise or a texture even in the absence of fear, simply because their brain doesn't filter or modulate that sensory information in the same way. It's not always about hypervigilance or emotional reactivity. It's often just a baseline difference in how input is processed. That distinction is important. To illustrate this even more clearly, think about synesthesia, the phenomenon where someone hears music and sees colors or tastes flavors when they hear words. It's a real and fascinating sensory anomaly, but it's not autism. It doesn't involve social communication challenges, restricted and repetitive behaviors, or lifelong functional impairments. It's just one way that neurodiversity can show up in a person. And the same goes for sensory sensitivity. It might be part of a broader autism picture, or it might not. It's also worth mentioning that some people experience significant sensory sensitivities without meeting criteria for autism, a concept often referred to as sensory processing disorder, or SPD. While SPD isn't currently recognized as a formal diagnosis in the DSM, it's still a very real and valid experience for many people. SPD describes a brain that's over or under reactive to sensory input, sometimes in very specific ways, like being unable to tolerate tags on clothing, or becoming overwhelmed by fluorescent lights, or feeling disoriented by certain sounds or smells. These experiences can affect daily functioning, but they don't necessarily mean a person is autistic. Now, if I can give an example of how all of the above factors can seemingly merge into what looks like autism, consider this hypothetical example. Imagine someone, call his name Alex. Alex is an introverted adult who gets overwhelmed in noisy, crowded environments. Tags on his clothing feel like sandpaper, flickering lights make their head throb, and they've always had a strong startle reflex. Social situations are exhausting, not because Alex doesn't care about others, but because maybe he cares too much. He may overanalyze every word and facial expression, worrying they've said something that was wrong. They often replay conversations in their head for hours, picking apart every detail. It's not that they don't understand social rules, it's that they're hyper aware of them and terrified of messing up. This is a hallmark of social anxiety disorder, but not autism. But if you add in ADHD, things get even trickier. When Alex is anxious, his thoughts may race, and he may have a hard time staying present in a conversation. He might interrupt or forget what someone just said, not because he lacks empathy, but because his executive functioning is bottlenecked. His brain is so overloaded with emotional processing and self-monitoring and self-consciousness that his working memory is depleted and his attention starts to falter. As a result, he may come across as scattered, disjointed, or socially awkward. From the outside, this can look like autism, especially when Alex also happens to have narrow interests, prefers routine, and needs downtime to recharge. But on the inside, Alex is flooded with emotion and self-consciousness, not disconnectedness. He may feel others' emotions deeply. He may want social connection. And when he's in a safe, relaxed setting, he's often quite expressive and engaging. The sensory sensitivity might reflect sensory processing disorder, a real condition even if not formally recognized in the DSM. And this very often co-occurs with anxiety or trauma or neurodivergence. The intense focus on niche topics, that's also not uncommon for people who tend to lean introvert or very creative or people with high trait openness. So while Alex's experiences are absolutely valid and can be very challenging, they may be better explained by a combination of sensory processing disorder, social anxiety, ADHD, and his personality traits, not autism. This distinction matters because misidentifying these issues as autism can limit access to the most helpful forms of treatment and support. With the right approach, like maybe CBT for anxiety, executive functioning coaching, sensory regulation strategies, Alex can make meaningful progress and reduce distress, often in ways that would not be expected if autism was the core issue. One final piece to this puzzle is insight, the paradox of self-referral. Ironically, many people who do have autism don't self-refer for assessment. Why? Because they often lack the same type of social comparison that makes someone say, I feel different. It's usually a parent, a teacher, or a partner who notices persistent difficulties. So when someone comes in saying, I think I might be autistic, and they've been replaying conversations, researching symptoms, and agonizing over their identity, that level of self-awareness is often a sign against autism and more aligned with social anxiety or trauma. Let's be clear though, some people with autism do self-refer, especially those who are verbal and have good insight. But statistically, it's less common. Now, here's the part that's hardest to talk about, but I do feel it has to be said. When we talk about autism, especially the kind that's diagnosed in early childhood, we're talking about profound developmental differences. We're talking about children who usually don't speak, don't respond to their name, don't make eye contact or return a parent's smile or loving gestures. We're talking about meltdowns that can last for hours, bolting into traffic without awareness of the danger of doing that, and obsessive interests that dominate daily life. Families in these situations are not just stressed, they're often overwhelmed, heartbroken at the loss of connection with their child, and in need of round-the-clock support. So when you say, I think I have autism, you're basically placing yourself somewhere in the spectrum of need. And that's not wrong, but it is worth asking, is it accurate? Or are you dealing with something that resembles autism, but isn't? Social anxiety, introversion, ADHD, trauma, which can all co-occur, these can all create profound distress. But they're often treatable in ways that classic autism is not. And here's the hopeful part. If it's not autism, it might mean that change is more possible, that healing is within your reach, that your struggles, while real, are not set in neurological stone, Because ultimately, diagnosis isn't about gatekeeping. It's about clarity. It's about finding the right tools, the right support, and the right story to tell yourself about who you are and who you can become. You are still you, with or without a label. And if the people around you can't accept that and accept you for who you are, then maybe it's time to find new people. So thanks for sticking with me on this difficult topic. If you found this helpful, please feel free to like or share or subscribe or share to people that may benefit from this information. And I have some information and resources and links to other topics related stuff to autism down below. So yeah, thanks for watching and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next episode.